Good morning, family, friends, and colleagues. It's an honor of mine to be able to say a few words about Dr. Mike Murtaugh. Thank you, Monsi, for inviting me. Connie Murtaugh, thanks again. The slides that you have showing behind me will continue to loop, but I reached out to several colleagues and friends that I thought worked with Mike or knew Mike really close to send one or two slides that, in their mind, was a picture of Mike. So for those of you that worked with Mike, my hope today is to be able to trigger a fond memory. For those of you in this room that did not get the opportunity to really get to know Mike or whatever, my goal here in the next couple minutes is just to be able to give you a glimpse at what this man was all about, some of his character and some of his accomplishments. As Monsi mentioned, and I believe it's going to be in the proceedings, is a very nice write-up of what Mike was able to accomplish in life, what was important to him. Things like that comes out in this write-up, but especially his personal growth. I think that's, some of us know him from the University of Minnesota and how he influenced us with his science and knowledge and so forth, but this write-up shows you the path that he took in his life before he got to the University of Minnesota. I do want to mention that, and I'll probably mention this a couple of times, Mike's passion was first family, and then the teaching, the interaction with practitioners, and also the research that he was able to accomplish. And he was quite proficient with this, as you'll see, the number of scientific articles that he was able to get published. It's incredible. Mike was tuned in to us practitioners very closely. He wanted to know what was going on in the field. He wanted to know what pathogen, especially around PRRS, but he wanted to know there are other risk factors that we practitioners would look at or how we would go about a certain challenge. And then as our relationship grew, and of course, as Monsi mentioned, ASF, biosecurity come on board a few years ago, that was a lot of our discussions that we would have. And as I look back in my notes, I think my relationship with Mike started over 15 years ago at a conference. And of course, PRRS was what brought us together. His knowledge on the immunology of PRRS was amazing. A lot of us envied him. Most of us envied him. But that was his passion, but he wanted to make sure that the science was being implemented as best we could. And I know another one of our colleagues, I don't know if I haven't seen him yet, Mark Wagner, also influenced Mike. Because Mike would then turn around and call me sometimes and say, hey, have you seen this? You know, and again, it was a geographic separation. Mark's up here, I was in central part of the United States, so he was looking at things in a very broad way, but he wanted to really know how he could help us, how the science would help us. I will admit, though, that at these conferences, when we'd get together, there was often a fine glass of wine that helped our conversation. This is an aspect of Mike that many of you might know or might not know, but he knew his wines. He especially was keen on wines out of Spain, South America, and Australia. And we would talk about the grapes. Now, trust me, I don't remember much of that, but it was part of my education that Mike would give me. It was at a breakfast meeting at Leman in 2017 that I first understood the complexity of the health challenge that Mike was under. And he left from this conference and went to Europe right away, even before he had his medical action plan in place. So from that point on, a lot of our conversations was about the ups and downs that occur in a medical when you go through a very difficult medical challenge. And sometimes these things would be daily. Our conversations weren't, but his ups and downs as you go through these difficult medical challenges would occur quite frequently. But you know, he remained positive through that whole challenge. He had a smile, and this is, sorry, but this is how I remember Mike. All through that challenge, he would have a sarcastic comment or two, but he would, he would smile, and that was Mike's life. That's how he approached it. He had a very positive attitude through the whole thing. The other thing I ask of these people that sent the pictures and others that didn't send pictures was give me one or two adjectives that I could share with you guys that help Mike help you understand some of Mike's character. I'm going to start with a word phrase, and that first one is he wasn't a very good poker player. Now, that's not anything to do with poker. But if you ever, and this happened to me on more than one occasion, if you'd ever ask Mike a question about science and it was totally incorrect, he would have a certain way that he would answer you. He'd blink his eyes 2 or 3 times real quick, then he'd kind of look to the right and look to the left, and like somebody else was going to be standing there listening to our conversation. But what he was doing was loading up his rebuttal to the question. Honestly, this happened to me more than one time. Wise, that was another adjective that often came up. His knowledge and understanding of PERS immunology, of course, was envied, but it was what brought us to Mike, and it was what Mike could do for us in our profession. He'd give us his opinion, and then we could take that as practitioners, which made us more knowledgeable, to help us understand what was going on with a very stubborn virus like PERS. Of course, mentor, teacher, that was oftentimes some of the first adjectives that was thrown out. Mike's passion showed in his lectures on PERS topics, and then PED as it came later. Mike's passion showed in his teaching to us, to students, and especially in his grad students. Kindness was another adjective that oftentimes came out from my responses. Mike was always thinking of others, and it was his servant attitude that really helped our profession. Of course, his humor. That was one of the things that was always, sometimes you didn't know where he was coming from in his email reply, but there was always a little bit of humor in there. And of course, with that was sarcasm. And you know, when I first, it was just part of Mike. And you would be talking to him, and if he had a change in thought partway through our discussion, he would stop, and you might have to, and he'd say, "Oh," and you'd think, "All right, what's happening next?" You know, you might sit there or stand there talking to him for saying nothing for 30 seconds to a minute before then he would be able to expound upon that change in thought. 2 more aspects I'd like to mention before closing. One of them is the fact that he would often use veterinary medicine is an oxymoron. The first time I heard that, I said, what is this? Oxymoron. Well, oxymorons is where you take 2 opposing things to make an effect. And he used this phrase for us in practice because we would oftentimes be doing things that the science didn't support. And because of that, it was part of Mike's wanting to learn, constantly learning, that he'd come back and say, well, that's an oxymoron. And so that was another area that we talked about. And then, of course, as I've already mentioned, Mike's passion, the focus around family, food, good wine, and PERS virus is how I'm going to remember him. Connie, we will continue to lift lift you and your family up in prayer. I know this last year has been incredibly difficult, as we've been talking. And I've had to stop a couple of times myself and say, gosh, I wonder what Mike would think about this. He was a close friend. With that, I want to thank you for this opportunity.